Honorable Minister, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. I was so much surprised by the final quote by your Minister of Education saying that only educated people can be free. Why I was surprised? Because I have almost the same statement in the end of my presentation. But first, before starting with Estonia, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. And I'd like to congratulate Colombia on their social and political success and peace agreement. Very many people worldwide have followed your efforts, and you do have a number of friends, me being one of them. So getting the invitation, I immediately agreed to come over to see your beautiful and great country. I'd like to start with a few words about Estonia. It's not only a faraway country for you, but it's also even not a small, but a very small country. Estonia is 1.3 million people. 1.3 million. It's 40 times less than Colombia. It's 20 times less by area. It only gained its independence less than 100 years ago. For the written history of almost 1,000 years, we've been ruled by different neighbors, by the Danes, the Germans, the Swedes, the Poles, and the Russians. It was only 200 years ago then serfdom was abolished in Estonia, and Estonians came physically free from their rulers. 50 years later, they had established public schools for their children, and also music ensembles like the one you saw here performing for us. Culture and education were the founding stones of present-day Estonia. 100 years ago, the literacy rate in Estonia was already 95%, with a compulsory education of 4 years or 4 winters in school. Why I'm saying that? I'm saying that because I believe that this attraction to learning and education is a core quality for building not only a successful, economically successful nation, but also a coherent country, socially equitable, thriving. Economy is a consequence of that. Estonia is not a rich country in European comparison, but it's clearly richer than most of the countries in the world. And some of the success can clearly be attributed to education. Education has been the main vehicle to be successful through your personal, professional, and social careers. Estonian education system is rather simple. We do have kindergartens for children from the age 2 to 6. It's not compulsory, but it's almost free to everybody. And more than 90% of the children go for at least 3 years in preschools to a kindergarten. We do have a national curriculum, a very soft one, a very basic one. But we've tried to make the educational system from the very early years a uniform system so that we create equal opportunities for everybody. Compulsory basic education is from the age 7 to 16, followed by a gymnasium or vocational schools for 3 years. Higher education is also public and free, and roughly 50% of the age group enter higher education. Interestingly enough, Estonia has become one of the countries where we have reversed gender gap. We have 2 girls per 1 boy in higher education. We have a problem. Yes, Estonia has emerged over the last 15 years when the PISA tests have been carried out as one of the most successful countries. If you ask me or other people, how comes, what are the main causes of that development, I have to tell you I don't know. Nobody really knows. We believe in a few things, but we also see, and those of you who've studied the material of the PISA exercise see that a multitude of factors affect the performance in these PISA tests. But it's equally important that you do not take the PISA tests too seriously. Those who don't perform as others are not bad, and those who are better than others are not necessarily doing everything right. I do believe there is no way to teach other nations what is a right solution for a national educational system. It is useful, but it's not the ultimate truth. Estonia has gradually moved upwards in these rankings and emerged 3rd after Singapore and Japan in the last exercise. I have to admit that Estonia has a very successful Nordic neighbor, Finland, who always been better than us until the last exercise. I've asked my Finnish colleagues how comes, and they don't know. They come to us asking, what has made you more successful than us? And I'm telling, I don't know either. But it's important that we learn from each other, even if we are in the middle or even in the lower part of the table. What we can teach maybe is something that we believe in, something that we call educational values. This is something that is important because this drives our societies and our educational systems. What has been important for Estonia over the last 200 years, if not more? Education was the only way up. Economically, socially, politically, if you will. 100 years ago, when Estonia gained independence from Russian and German rulers, we were all equal. And we believed in equitable and egalitarian education systems, and that was one of the basic principles of Estonian education systems between the 2 world wars and now after the end of the Soviet occupation for the last 25 years. Everybody should have the same opportunities. All schools shall be created equal, equally funded, equally supported, having the same level of teachers and same standards for graduation. Universal principles governing the curriculum, equitable access, and egalitarian approach to education as far as possible. Secondly, science-based education. We do believe that one should research into education, into what we teach and how we teach. And we see that enormous progress has been made over the recent years. And we increasingly understand that knowledge is needed, but it's clearly not enough. We've also learned that interpersonal skill, generic skills, first and foremost, learning skills are essential. We also know that these skills and attitudes are formed in a very early age. 7-year-olds may be too old. We have to start as early as possible. There's been a shift in the recent understanding of education. We've always believed that the most educated professor shall teach in universities, less educated ones in high schools, even less educated in basic, and in kindergartens you simply may take care of your children. Research shows that this is not true, and that is why we've launched a national initiative to have master degree teachers already in kindergartens, those who know psychology, those who know how to motivate children, handle their special needs, and solve a number of problems that inhibit children to perform later in their school careers. Research into education, understanding how it works, and making use of that knowledge through teacher education and continuous education into every school is vital and important. We also do believe that autonomy of schools and teachers is essential. Schools cannot and shall not be built up like armies, where there are fixed rules, orders, checks and balances in place. They know best what their community needs. Teachers know best their students. And we should trust the teachers. We should train them, support them, inform them, and trust them. There is no need for a bureaucratic apparatus in the form of inspectorates and other formal checks that undermines the status and self-esteem of teachers as well as schoolmasters, who are responsible first and foremost to their own community. But we shouldn't leave them alone. We should offer them support in what they are doing. Try to solve the problems that they raise. Autonomy of schools and teachers is a cornerstone of our educational systems. We've seen a dramatic shift in the way we teach over the last 25 years after the collapse of the Soviet system and end of Soviet occupation. The classical continental educational model, born in the 19th century and remodeled under different rules, but dominating in the former Soviet system, was very much based on formal procedures and the principle of stick and carrot. We try to move away from the classical stick and carrot approach. Yes, we need some praising and some negative feedback. But more important is to support the inner potential based on innate curiosity and the fun of learning that is so natural in every human being. The biggest challenge a school has is to sustain these very basic qualities of every child, not to end up in a boring place of formal learning motivated by stick and carrot alone. This is the greatest challenge. That means that learning must be interesting. I'd like to underline that being interesting is fundamentally different of being fun and easy and joyful. It still may be hard work, but if it's interesting, we know that children are able to work very, very hard, sometimes harder than the adults can. So if we organize the learning environments in the way that they want to learn hard, they'll do it without a stick, maybe a carrot. According to PISA studies, which is clearly not a ranking exercise, but rather a complicated study into educational systems, how they function, what is important and what is less important, where we are doing better, where we are doing less well. Studying what the Estonian strengths are, I have underlined a few of them, but clearly the differences between rural and urban schools is one of the smallest among all PISA countries. As underlined before, this has been a national policy over a very, very long time. But the same is true concerning social background. It is a challenge increasingly, since social differences have grown bigger over the recent years. But the very principle of Estonian educational system has been and shall be that the children of the rich and the poor from different ethnic backgrounds shall go to the same schools. We shouldn't create elitist private institutions, especially at the very early age. We keep asking our politicians where your children go to study. Sometimes it's not easy to answer. It's very, very important that business people, all stakeholders in the society, accept that principle. And this acceptance can only be based on trust, that the families wealthier, who can afford more, still trust the local school to send their children to. I believe if we fail in this endeavor, we fail in the future PISA tests. We also found that some technical parameters, like class size or even funding levels, are not crucial. Of course, the classes shall be of reasonable size. But we've seen that very small classes tend to perform weaker than classes where more students are studying together. There are studies who show that this is based on the different educational environment that is created by more children studying at the same time, because in addition to the teachers, they support each other and the peer support is sometimes even more important than the teacher support. We have a problem based on so-called historic background. But we have different schools, Estonian and Russian-speaking schools. This we've inherited from the Soviet past. We are moving gradually towards more uniform system. But we have Estonian and Russian schools, and unfortunately, the schools with a Russian language of tuition perform weaker than the schools with Estonian tuition language. What is the reason? PISA is measuring not formal knowledge, where the Russian schools sometimes perform better even than the Estonian schools. But they put an emphasis on functional literacy, reading skills in a broader sense. And we have to admit that we haven't been able to reform the Russian-speaking schools at the same rate as we've managed to reform the Estonian schools. More critical thinking, more interpretation of what you've learned. What makes sense for you, not what you know. We failed in that. The gap is narrowing, but it has showed us that putting an emphasis on a different concept of learning based on a modern understanding of education is important. I'd like to say a few words about current reforms. Some of them been launched some time ago with my participation, but they still continue. One of them being streamlining curriculum. We've traditionally had very heavily loaded national curricula. Too many things in it, and we know that we forget most of that. Most means more than 90%. We should learn technically less and understand more, because understanding will not be forgotten. Knowing may be forgotten. Streamlining it, making it more open, making learning more practical, skills-based. Coming back to what I said before, the biggest challenge we face is to how to sustain the natural, innate curiosity and the fun of learning in children into their older age. And last but not least, whatever we do, the critical element in education is the teacher. And it is important that we educate and train best teachers possible. How to do that? That requires first and foremost that young people want to become teachers. And we have a problem with that. The social status of teachers is not the same today as it was 20 or 30 years ago. Teachers are not anymore success models or kind of individuals whose social status is unchallenged and unquestioned. Reversing that trend is critically important for my country, and maybe not only mine. And in addition to the role of teachers, we have to face a challenge posed by modern technologies, information and communication technologies first and foremost. There have been people who believed that information technologies will make schools and formal learning obsolete altogether. But we know today that more computers in school is not a solution, but may be a problem if these devices, these gadgets, are not involved into educational process in an appropriate way. Technology is not a solution. It may help. But we also know that emerging technologies can help a lot. They can do a number of things much better than the teachers can. Artificial intelligence is emerging worldwide, and clearly it's going to contribute into how we learn and how we teach. A balanced, responsible integration of these technologies into educational systems and educational process, into teacher education and continuous education, in the way that it's not undermining the status of teachers in the society, is a very serious challenge. I believe we can face that challenge in a responsible way. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you once more for the invitation and the patience to listen my presentation and Estonian experience. If it is or was of some use to you, I'm happy. But in any case, I'm happy to having this opportunity to tell you about how we think about teachers, schools, and children. And I wish your educational system, which clearly faces very, very serious challenges, all the best. Thank you for your attention.
Could you give us 2 minutes, please, for questions? Go back to the stage, and we're going to ask you questions. Give us 2 minutes, please.
Así es. Así es, tenemos entonces 2 preguntas que ustedes están haciendo a través de nuestra app, señor Avisok, y las vamos a ver entonces en nuestra pantalla. La primera es, ¿cuál es el reto actual más grande en la educación mundial?
The biggest challenge is reaching those people who don't have access to modern education worldwide. And there are millions and millions and millions and millions of those who don't have that access. I think that is a global responsibility and the greatest global challenge. So when I talked about equity, it's not only a national level, it's on the global level. But I know it's not an easy task.
Muy bien, y la segunda pregunta es, ¿cómo formar a los maestros para educar en el siglo XXI?
Well, first, I don't believe that teachers of the 21st century are fundamentally different of those teachers who were trained in the previous century. Even the teachers educated in the 20th century do a wonderful job. But I think we should put a stronger emphasis on the research recently done into human thinking, human learning, understanding how people learn, and less emphasis on technical knowledge of certain disciplines. Keeping up the motivation, encouraging young people, knowing how to do that, knowing how to educate even those young kids who don't want to learn at all, because they have a problem, what their family or the school can't solve. So let's forget sometimes about mathematics and physics and chemistry and help the child to find himself, to become a normal child first and then study math. You can't do it the other way around.
Listo. Muy bien, thank you so much, Mr. Abixo. No more questions. Mil gracias por su presentación. Y para construir una nación más educada, debemos sin duda alguna preguntarnos cuáles son esas acciones políticas y sociales que inciden directamente en la calidad y pertinencia de la educación. Para responder a esta cuestión, pues invitamos nuevamente al escenario al doctor Jack Abixo y a la doctora Inka Matila. Ella es directora adjunta del PNUD en Colombia. Juan David Correa, director de la revista Arcadia y Soho, conversará con ellos. A ustedes nuevamente, bienvenidos. Pueden pasar adelante, por favor. Juan David, buenos días. Bienvenido, adelante.